Right.
The battlefield was used in coordination with other squads of its platoon and/or company. Second, the main source for this is the US manual German squadding. Time to take a look at German squad tactics in World War II. Two important points. First, the squad rarely acted alone on the battlefield. It was used in coordination with other squads of its platoon and/or company. Second, the main source for this is the US manual German squadding combat from the Military Intelligence Service. It is a partial translation of a German manual. And with using other sources, I could detect some small errors and inconsistencies. Nevertheless, take everything with a grain of salt, especially since manuals and combat realities often differ. Let's begin with the organization and armament. The German infantry squad in World War II, for the most part, consisted of one squad leader and 9 infantrymen, thus a total of 10 men. Initially, all men, besides the machine gun and his assistants, were equipped with the Karabiner 98 Kurz, the German standard rifle in World War II. Even the squad leader was equipped with that rifle. Yet around 1941, he was issued an MP40 submachine gun, 6 magazines and 32 shots each. The machine gun was equipped with an MG34 and later on with an MG42. He was also issued a pistol and an ammo box with 50 rounds. The assistant gunner carried 4 armored rounds with 50 shots each. Additionally, one ammo box with 300 rounds. He was also issued a pistol. There was also an ammo carrier assigned to the machine gunner, whose job was to carry and supply ammunition. He carried 2 ammo boxes with 300 rounds each. Unlike the assistant, he was issued a rifle, not a pistol. Note that the German squadding combat indicates a pistol instead of a rifle as a weapon for the ammo carrier. But it seems this is incorrect and is probably from an old layout of the squad, which was used in 1937. Now, each rifleman had around 9 clips to his rifle with 5 shots each, thus 45 rounds. This was the regular amount. According to Buchner, more rounds were issued in case of a combat situation. Also, the second in command was armed the same way as the regular rifleman. Hence, in total, the squad had 1 light machine gun, 1 submachine gun, 2 pistols, 7 rifles, and several hand grenades, which were issued depending on the situation. Now, the roles and responsibilities of each squad member were as follows. The squad leader was commanding the unit. He directed which targets the LMG should engage, and if the combat situation permitted, also the rifle fire. His responsibilities outside of the combat included that the equipment of the unit was in order and that enough ammunition was available. The second in command was his assistant and was in command during the absence of the squad leader. His responsibilities were to communicate with the platoon command and also adjacent squads. Thus, he was vital for the coordination. Next is the machine gunner. He operated the light machine gun and was responsible for taking care of the weapon. His assistant would help him setting up the MG, supply ammo, and assist him in combat. Usually, he would be positioned left of the gunner or to his rear. He had to be ready and close enough to support the gunner with tasks like changing the bell or fixing jams. And in case the gunner couldn't continue operating the MG, he would take his role. The ammo carrier was responsible for inspecting the ammo, refilling fired ammo belts, and checking for left ammunition. He usually stayed in the rear and in cover, but could act as a rifleman if necessary. The regular rifleman's duty was to participate in combat with his rifle and bayonet. The rifleman formed the assault part of the squad, thus if necessary assaulting the enemy position with grenades and bayonets. Although not officially designated, they would also serve as ammo carriers to varying degrees. Now let's take a look at formations. The basic close order formations were the squad line or Reihe, the squad column or Kette, which was basically a 90-degree turn of the previous, and of course the squad in march order. As you can see, the machine gunner with his assistants is always at the very front. He was the key member of the squad, which is also indicated by his designation Schütze 1, infantryman number 1. These were close order formations that were not suited for dangerous situations. Close order changed due to terrain, hostile activity, or other circumstances. Basic extended order formations were the squad column, or Schützenkette, and the skirmish line, or Schützenreihe. The squad column in extended order was not a straight line. Instead, the soldiers used terrain for cover. Although the principal order of the line remained, note that the second in command was at the end, ensuring that the squad stayed together. The skirmish line was used if the firepower of the whole squad was necessary. In this case, the riflemen moved to the left and right of the machine gunner, who remained at the central position. The forward half of the infantrymen moved to the right, and the other half to the left. Alternatively, an echelon right or left deployment was also possible. In this case, all the men moved to the right or left of the machine gunner. The distance between the men was about 3.5 meters, yet it was only a guideline. Note that the squadron leader had no fixed position in this formation. In terms of leadership, the translated manual states that leading by example is essential. It is explicitly stated. In order to be a leader in the field, the superior must display an exemplary bearing before his men in the moment of danger and be willing, if necessary, to die for them. The weak and vacillating are then guided by his example and by his disregard of self in accepting privations and dangers. Now let's take a look at the squad in offensive actions. It is very important to note that the squad in offensive combat would not act alone, but as an element of its platoon. Note that each platoon contained usually 4 squads. So let's look at the different stages of offensive combat. The stages are as follows: development, deployment, advancing, attack, and penetration. Note that most other sources use less stages, and the transition from one stage to another can be quite fluent or blurry. The development phase is the first step in the preparation of an attack. The rifle company left their marching route and broke up into 3 platoons. Those platoons themselves separated into 4 squads, yet the squads remained in close formation. The machine gun and other important equipment was now carried by hand and not on carts anymore. Next was the deployment phase, which was about organizing the troops into combat formations. The squad leader may have received his orders directly from the platoon leader or acted independently based on the mission of the platoon. Since the units were now in battle formation, the advance phase began. The advance was ideally performed in squad column with the light machine gun on the front. This would allow rearward supporting machine guns and other weapons to fire safely past the advancing squads. If the squad was under effective enemy fire, the squad needed to use its own fire to support its movement by achieving temporarily fire superiority. Fire and movement should be employed, which means that one part of the squad fires to cover the movement of the other part of the squad. This principle can also be used on a larger scale where one squad covers another squad. If areas were covered by enemy artillery fire, it would have been avoided if possible. If not, these areas needed to be crossed during firing pauses in quick rushes. Generally, it was recommended to use rushes when the situation and enemy fire did permit them. Following a successful advance of the squads far enough, the attack phase commenced. Although the difference is not so obvious at first, since both stages include firing upon the enemy and also advancing. But during the advance phase, firing is only employed if it is necessary, whereas in the attack phase, firing was usually a crucial element. Initially, the firefight was started by heavy weapons from supporting units like artillery, infantry cannon, and heavy machine guns. These weapons focus on the destruction or neutralization of strong points. Yet it is noted, it is not the task of the riflemen to engage in firefights of long duration in order to gain fire superiority. In the attack, in the final analysis, it is the vigorous shot power of the rifleman with bayonet which overcomes the enemy. Hence, at this point, the squad still advanced. Generally, the squad should move as much forward without firing as possible. Only if this wasn't possible anymore, it should engage the enemy. The final stage is the penetration into the enemy positions. It is usually initiated around 100 meters away from the enemy positions. In penetration, the whole group rushes or fires as a unit. If possible, the platoon leader employs several squads advancing from various directions against the objective. In this way, the defensive fires of the enemy will be scattered. This form of attack is no longer carried out by the squad, but by the platoon. It is important that the maximum amount of fire is provided during an assault. For this reason, the LMG should be positioned to fire into the enemy position without risking friendly fire. If such a position is not attainable, the LMG should be used directly in the assault and fire from the head. Furthermore, neighboring units provide additional firepower and will support the assault by complementary attack. Once the rifleman is in the enemy position, the designated grenade throwers will command to produce the grenades, and after the detonation, the squad stormed the positions under the lead of the squad leader. To give you a better idea how two squads with supporting elements would assault an enemy position, here's a little illustration. Based on an original German manual, from what I can tell, but the document I got it from provided no direct reference. Here you can see the German position on the left side and the fictional enemy on the right. Both positions are reinforced by barbed wire. There's a German mortar pit with a light mortar, and in the visible rear positions another light and heavy mortar are available. The mortars would attack the following areas of the enemy positions to prevent reinforcements. To support the attack, two heavy machine guns would be positioned on the flanks. In the center, a squad with a light machine gun would fire at the enemy positions to support the attack. The assault itself would be performed by two assault squads that were supported by light machine guns. The first squad would directly assault the enemy position, whereas the second one would attack the rear and cut it off from any reinforcements. Once the assault was successful, the squad leader would ensure discipline and prepare against a potential counterattack. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And see you next time. Let's compare two of the most important tanks of 1941, the German Panzerkampfwagen 3 Ausführung K and the Soviet T-34 Model 41. Now usually people look mainly at the raw data, aka the stats. This will be done here as well, yet very briefly, because I think the more important aspect is to actually qualify or disqualify the stats based on a more thorough and holistic look at the overall situation. while staying in the technical and tactical domain. So let's look at the chosen criteria, namely firepower, ergonomics and visibility, armor protection, mobility, and communications. These are influenced by various factors, for instance, manufacturing quality and the quality of production materials. Yet unlike Zaloga, I don't consider crew training a factor, nor availability like Cavalier does, since I focus on the technical and tactical level. As such, we look at the finished tank. Additionally, assuming that the tank is properly maintained and has a standard ammunition load. So, no Panzergranate at 40 span. As such, let's start with firepower. Panzer III came with the short-barreled 50mm gun, 5 cm Kampfwagen-Kampfkanone L42, whereas the T-34 had a 76mm gun F34. We are looking at the penetration values against armor planes at a 30-degree angle. And as you can see here, the F34 is clearly better penetration value. With 1,500 meters, 76mm armor piercing shell has a higher penetration value than the Panzergranate 900 of the Panzer III at 100 meters. It is rather apparent that the Soviet gun is far better in terms of penetration, yet it also had a far better high explosive power than the German 50mm gun. After all, the 50mm shell was significantly smaller and lighter with around 2 kg, whereas the 76mm shell had around 6 kg. Note, this was the total weight, not the high explosive. Of course, it should be added that the Germans also had the Panzergranate 40, which was a high-velocity armor-piercing projectile with a tungsten core. At 100 meters distance, it had a higher penetration than both the regular shell and that of the T-34, namely 94mm. Yet this was a specialized shell that was rather rare. As a result, supplies were modest, with most German tanks receiving only about 5 rounds of this type of ammo in summer 1941. As such, I don't consider it as a standard ammunition load. Furthermore, its penetration capabilities dropped sharply over distance. At a range of 500 meters, they were down to 55 millimeters. As such, it has little influence on our assessment. Yet firepower is not just about penetration values and the high explosive power in your shell. As Cavalier points out, the firepower of tanks is determined by the ability of the armaments to destroy the designated targets. However, to start with, it needs to get a hit on the target, and there much depends on the capabilities of the sights. Here's one major issue: the optics of Soviet tanks were of lower quality than the German ones. As such, the probability to hit was lower. German tanks were equipped with telescopic sights with a magnification factor similar to that of the Soviets, and the field of vision was 23.5 to 25 degrees with the Panzer III, whereas the T-34 had only a field of vision of 14.5, which means that at the same range, the Soviet gunner saw through his sight about a third of the area the German gunner could see. This problem was further hampered by the fact that the Soviet sight let only about 39% of the light through. As a result of good light conditions, the Soviet could engage at around 800 meters, whereas the Germans could engage about 1,500 meters. Although this was negligible due to the limited penetration values and common engagement ranges in summer 1941. Yet in low light conditions like fog, rain, or snow, the Germans had a distinct advantage. This is also pointed out by Zaloga. The optical quality of Soviet tank sights was inferior to their German counterparts of the key optics factories were evacuated in 1941. The Soviet tank commander recalled, "We always recognized the high quality of the Tsar's gun sights. We had nothing like that." Cavalier also notes that there were issues with the brittleness of Soviet shells, but he only offers evidence against the armor of the Tiger. Additionally, reports from tank archives where firing against various panzers was conducted did not show any issues. As such, I don't think this was an issue in summer 1941. One factor that definitely decreased the T-34's firepower was that its actual rate of fire, accuracy, and aiming time were suboptimal. As pointed out by letter to the People's Commissar of the Armor Industry in March 1943, at which point the T-34 was already matured. One of the main design flaws of the T-34 tank, which significantly reduces its combat power, is the low rate of fire, low speed aiming, and low accuracy of the tank's fire. Taking these aspects into account, the T-34 is the winner in the firepower category, although not by a wide margin. It is also important to point out that Cavalier comes actually to a different assessment. In short, the armaments of the Soviet tanks seemed impressive only on paper. In reality, its effectiveness left much to be desired. This is due to the fact that he used different criteria. And since one of these criteria is very crucial for understanding Operation Barbarossa, I covered it in a separate video on my second channel, so be sure to check it out there. Yet for now, let's move on to the next factor, namely ergonomics. And thus it is time to let the man speak that actually has been inside both tanks, and also a ton of others, mainly Nicholas Morin, aka the Shifted.
The Panzer III was a very good tank with its flaws. I'm not going to say it's a perfect tank. I mean, if you had to change the transmission on yourself, but I, in my 1m98 self, fit very nicely in the Panzer III. I can operate a Panzer III, no problem, any position. It's very good for me, and so, of course, the average German crewman of the time would have been very comfortable and very effective. Not so much for the T-34. The testing of the T-34, the optics, came in for a fair bit of slagging from the testing staff. They were not satisfied with the visibility that came from the T-34, from any position, from the driver, from the commander, from the gunner. The all-round sight had a 120-degree field of vision, which is fantastic. It did have the advantage that it was a periscopic sight that you could ambush from all down positions, but again, you have a couple of problems with crew overload and a lack of training. The Germans, at least, well, they had a good bullet, so the TC could find the targets. The gunner did not have a periscopic sight. Curiously, the assault boats did not have assault. And pretty reasonable odds, good clarity, and a relatively wide field of vision. So they could find the targets much faster, they could lay on the target much faster, and they could pump more rounds at the target. So there you have now your space is being taken up by the suspension, your armor is taken up space. Your optics aren't what they should be. Your crew are completely overloaded. There are issues, of course, simply with operating the vehicle as a driver. And the airship is famously bad, especially for single vehicle. God help the bad runner who can see everything and has no activism. I think you can see where I'm starting to go. T-34 on paper was a fantastic vehicle, and it was developed a very good vehicle. 1940-41, though, it was nowhere near capable of living up to what the paper statistics said it could. The German vehicle, well, that was designed and was as capable of what it was designed to do.
Many of the issues mentioned by Chifton were due to the fact that the T-34 did not have a three-man turret, unlike the Panzer III. As such, the T-34 commander was occupied with duties that did not involve spotting and commanding a tank, which further reduced the chances of spotting an enemy, coordination effectiveness with the crew and other tanks. Additionally, a lack of proper vision devices was hard to circumvent, since the T-34's tank's poor hatch design prevented tank commanders from riding with their heads outside of the tanks. As such, the Germans soon adapted. In the summer of 1941, a German instruction pamphlet on basic counter-solar tanks recommended firing at them with ordinary machine guns, starting at a range